All right, so as we all know, we are now 4 months, almost 4 months officially into the Biden presidency, and he has yet to deliver a proper formal State of the Union address. Although last week he did give a formal address to Congress, and depending on how you look at it, that can be either a good thing or can be a bad thing in that he's trying to hide from something. And so to start off with, one of the points that he really pushed with this speech, his whole speech was a message of we're trying to get out of this pandemic. We're trying to get back to normal. We're trying to really get this behind us because we now have vaccines, we now have faster tests, we are finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And one of the big points that he made in his speech was that the $2 trillion in tax cuts that President Trump had previously enacted in 2017 would add unnecessary extra money to the federal deficit. Now, the problem with that is according to the Tax Policy Center, a bipartisan organization, they took a look at the tax cuts themselves and oddly enough found that 80% of Americans actually got some sort of a tax cut or another. And I know personally from my own experience, I know my dad's company got a pretty big tax break from the federal government because of that law that was passed or that resolution that was passed by President Trump for the tax cuts helped them so that they could start sending money out to their employees and start reinvesting in it because they weren't having to pay such high corporate taxes. And that in and of itself seems like an odd point to make in economic recovery to say that, okay, we're trying to get better, but this thing in the past is limiting us. In reality, it actually kind of helped us even before all this happened, and it was probably one of the things that was the saving grace for a lot of small businesses during the pandemic that were struggling to survive. And another point that was also made is that 650 people increased their wealth by at least $1 trillion within the span of the year since the pandemic started, which I believe was March 15th or 17th of 2020, somewhere in the lines of that. The problem with that is that it's too narrow of a time. Yes, it can seem like billionaires can just become billionaires overnight with everything in our society. You can have some really awesome idea and overnight it just blows up. But according to Americans for Tax Fairness, it's this institute that deals, just like the previous source I mentioned, with tax policies and how they affect people. They said that it was too narrow of a time for a year for President Biden to say, you guys got way too wealthy within the span and we're going to come after you. In reality, it was not even $1 trillion over the span of 2 years. So, well, even before, it wasn't even anything close to that. And so, not to mention the fact, too, is how would you be able to get rich so quickly if the market dropped almost 1,000 points within the span of 2 weeks between mid-February and when everything shut down? And even then, the market was still virtually a dumpster fire well into May, June, and even July because things weren't, we still had a pretty bumpy road as we were trying to figure out how to navigate this. And once we hit the summer months, then we kind of started to have an idea what we were doing and the market recovered. But for those first few months, the market was abysmally down. And from what personally I know about economics, it's hard to make money when the market is not doing well. If the market's doing well, you are able to make a whole lot of money. You're able to do really well, assuming you know how to capitalize on it pretty well. Fact of the matter is that really it's not feasibly possible for them to have done that. So that's another point that seems to have been overshadowed in the response to the speech or in maybe the critiquing of the speech, but it's definitely one that should be caught and should be noted. Now, it's also important to mention with every speech that's given by a president, typically the opposition will deliver response to said speech, and the Republican choice for their response was pretty unique in that it was Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate. Now, does that seem kind of giddy, of course you were going to do that? Maybe. Depends on how you look at it. But from the sense of counterculture and everything that's happened in the past year, it seems like an incredibly smart move. Not from the perspective to say, okay, we're not racist, we're not anti black because we have a black senator. I think it goes farther to show the message that, you know what, yes, we have a black senator. Yes, we're going to have him do it because he understands it just the same as us. There's no issue of skin color. We're not putting him out there just because he's a black guy. No, he's a black guy in Congress that President Biden has said multiple things about multiple multiple groups of minorities, and one in particular is the African American community. And for the Republicans to come out and say, we're going to have Senator Tim Scott deliver a response, I feel like was a pretty smart move. And it also shows President Biden that maybe the opposition actually is a lot smarter than what he would give them credit for. For them to throw that out there now in the society, and what's happening right now, they can't be labeled racist or they can't be labeled white supremacist because now they have a black man who is delivering the response, who also understands it just the same as any of them. And so that was a smart move. But overall, the speech, you can argue, was about unity, but it didn't really feel like it. Personally, I watched part of it, and it seemed, quite a bit of it seemed like it was, this is what the past president did, this was garbage, we're not doing this, we're going to do A, B, and C, other things, we're going to put money here, we're going to put money here, and we're going to put money here, and it's going to be different from what the last president did. Well, in a time like this, how does that promote unity? And some might argue that, well, President Biden was talking about vaccines, and yes, to an extent, it is a good thing that we have vaccines, especially for those vulnerable. The only problem with that I personally have is vaccines are so controversial that it's hard to push something that is so controversial. When you know that there are plenty of good stories and plenty of bad stories that balance it out, it's not all good. So for you to go and push it up, for as good as it is, even though it's really not that, it's about maybe half, because you've got one part of the country that says, we don't want to take this, and you got other parts that are saying, you have to take this or else. For example, I know Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has passed legislation, if I'm not wrong, within the last week, that pretty much banned vaccine passports. So for the president to really jump on something that controversial in terms of the whole country doesn't really seem like it spells a message of unity. It seems like it's trying to push the idea that you need to do this or else because it's there, and if you don't do it, you're going against whatever's right, and you're trying to prolong this and this, that, and the other thing. So it seems really counterintuitive for him to do that. And overall, I don't feel like it was very entertaining. It wasn't very well received. And I felt like it was really one of the most partisan presidential speeches I've ever seen.